one last thing I failed to share is that we had a team that has worked on this. Leslie has been part of this. Todd and Mike Sindelar, another educator from Nebraska, led the development of the soil health activity that we've put together. And we've had about 10 individuals from Nebraska and Minnesota that have put this together and pilot tested, and it's just been fun to do as a team. So I appreciate everybody's efforts. What were your observations from the exercise?
You know, we knew we were looking at the benefits of manure and soil, but we couldn't forget the other parts of it. We couldn't forget the environmental and the water issues, as well as the trucking. It was a long way to go. So even though we were only, you know, the exercise I had was looking at soil, you had to bring everything else in with it also.
Good point, Christina. And the activity that you went through is one of 6 that we have. And so the other activities will be raising those specific challenges as well. So you're right, the decision in the end is a compilation of all those, plus, you know, just the conversations that occur around the table, things I consider, you know, like time and labor and logistics and things such as that. Any other observations from?
Yeah, for field 2, we had a lot of conversation. We happened to have a field that had lower levels of soil health indicators, and so I think maybe those were some things. I think John Mural was going to be our chairperson for what emojis we came up with on that.
Okay. All right. Any other observations from the group?
So at least I was curious, and one of the things we talked about was potassium as a nutrient, since it's not as talked about as phosphorus or nitrogen in terms of water quality or toxicity, like phytotoxicity, but was curious if anyone had thoughts or experiences about manure, particularly as it related to potassium, because our field had low phosphorus, but really high potassium. And that was one where we just started talking about that towards the end and didn't get all the way settled, but would be curious about that.
And the numbers you've seen were probably relatively typical of many of our Nebraska soils, where we just have a high potassium level historically. So for those fields, we don't get a whole lot of value out of the potassium in manure, but if a field is in need of potassium, there's a pretty significant value. One of the worksheets that focuses on the nutrient value does include that calculation for the potassium value.
Yeah, well, and my question was really towards that opposite point where, I mean, we face similar things in Colorado with phosphorus in some places. Like we already have a ton of this. So are we actually going to be doing damage by adding manure that may contain potassium rather than being more targeted with a chemical fertilizer? And I just don't think about potassium much out here, so I was curious if that has come up before. Is there such a thing as potassium toxicity in Nebraska for corn or soybeans?
Go ahead, Todd.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know that we've had that problem. I mean, we can get above 300 parts per million regularly in some of the tests. Now, as people are doing more where there are silage systems, where they're taking whole plants away, sometimes they can actually move that potassium down a little bit more. But traditionally, we used to always have, in the southeast part of Nebraska, where I grew up, we had very high potassium, over 300. But now we're starting to see, it's been some decades, and now we're starting to see some fields where they're actually maybe needing a little bit of potassium, where it's continually being used as, when you take whole plants away from the field, that's when sometimes you take some potassium away. And you can see on the fertilizer recommendation, we only need like 36 pounds per acre for our corn production and 55 pounds for the soybeans, that way. So that's why 200 is considered to be very high in our area. But again, I don't think it would be a danger if even you got in that 300 or 400 parts per million. I don't know there'd be a leaching problem or a toxicity problem for the plants.
So this is we're not going to answer all these questions today, but I think this is an example of the conversation that occurs around these tables of 8 people and farmers sharing their experience with others and really doing a lot of the instruction by kind of their sharing their collective experiences. And so one of the reasons we've been really happy with this exercise, Todd or Leslie, you want to add anything about what you've observed about these conversations?
I would just say that participants in general are very happy to get up and out of not watching PowerPoint presentations. They're very happy to be actively working on something and can find it really relatable back to their field. We did talk a little bit in our group about water quality and how we don't really show very well whether there's buffers along those streams or not, and how we can relate back to their own fields by they can look at those pictures and not really make a decision. And I like to tell folks when they're looking at that, well, what do you do on your farm? So let's pretend it's your farm. Are you farming right up next to that creek, or are you holding back a buffer area? Let's do it however you're doing it so that it relates back to your farm. And this does allow for that flexibility a little bit. And they really appreciate that.
Oh, I put up on the screen the results of the 3 fields. And I don't know if anybody wants to make any comments about takeaways from this.
Just commenting on field 4, the discussion in our group, except for distance, there was a lot of reasons why it was a really great location to move manure to, just because we had the lower organic matter, our phosphorus levels were fairly low. We didn't have a whole lot of slope. It seemed like kind of a nice spot. The sad emoji is really because we had that groundwater consideration being so close to the surface there. We thought it was a pretty good location, and we could have put all the emojis there.
Okay.
I mean, that's just me speaking. Well, we did talk. I think we talked a little bit about, this is beef manure, would it change if it was poultry, or if it was like the liquid dairy or swine? Would that make a difference? Just because of the permeability, the coarse texture soils, and the closeness to groundwater.
If we were moving a lot of water at 8 or 10 miles, we'd probably see more sad emojis on the transportation cost.
Well, yeah. But, one person mentioned the frac tanks that, we're moving at 20, some of these dairies in our area anyhow in Michigan, we're moving it quite a ways. And we can move it with semis and rather quickly. But yeah, that's a big sad emoji when you got to carry all that water.
Yes.
Well, we're not going to answer this all today, but I just wanted to let you kind of experience the process we go through and the way in which you engage that farmer in trying to answer these questions. And then you hope that when they return home, they're doing some of that same thought processes with their own employees and their own business partners. We've been real happy with this. So we haven't had a chance to really evaluate if that's changing practice or not, but we think it's got a lot more potential than if this had been 20 minutes of PowerPoints on these same topics. I raised a couple of questions about just physical observations you might make of these fields if you don't have soil health characteristic the numbers like aggregate stability available, or would you use other soil health measures as an alternative to any of those that we did use? I invite you to share any thoughts with us. You can either put them into the chat box or just share them verbally. And then I think, Leslie, we probably open up just to general questions as well, right?
Sure. And yeah, anybody can ask general questions at any time. Just unmute and ask us a question. I would say in our group, we talked about when the visual observations that you might make. Some of the things that came up were, well, are there cover crops being grown? Because that's going to make a difference in whether or not we were going to have potential runoff there. Same with residue cover. We talked about the infiltration rate on your field. If you know that your risk is lower, then that's another thing that you might talk about. And then we also mentioned grazing, whether that field is grazed or not might have an effect on that soil health parameters. Any other groups?
Yeah, for field 2, again, we had happy emojis because we did have a testing lower. As I look over, sometimes when we've done these with all the things, that wind factor, and when you see in that lower left-hand quadrant, the town that's there, that could be a consideration for the neighbor part of it too. And like I say, it was hard to just focus on soil health without thinking about that water quality risk. So we kind of spent a lot of time, I think, on the water quality risk because those almost go hand in hand, you know, on you have better health, you have less erosion, which can then help your environment too.
Right.
Any questions or other observations you'd like to share?
Your P indexing, are you using Russell or something else?
In Nebraska, we have a P-index tool that does a calculation of runoff and erosion. It is based on Russell 2. We have another faculty member that created that, so I can't tell you a whole lot more than that.
I can tell you that if you can use that calculation, and if it's close to a tipping point, we tell you to go get Russell 2 and do it correctly that way. It'll give you an estimate. We call it an erosion estimator. And then we say, you know, if you're along that line, then go ahead and go get Russell 2 done, and it'll give you a better prediction.
I guess I'm a technical service provider, so I write CAP programs in Ohio, so I'm just more familiar with MMP and the Russell 2, and I was just curious what you used.
Yep. Yep.
Other questions or comments before we wrap up?
I was going to say, how can this be utilized or shared within other state stuff because of some of the things I'm working on?
Sure. And we'd be glad to let you have access to the files, the electronic files, and we have everything together in its current form. I think in its current form, it would be usable as is. We have identified some modifications that we want to make that we'll be probably wrapping up by over the next month or so. But if you wanted access to the files currently, contact Leslie or myself.
Okay.
We'll get access to those.
I will do that because I'll probably contact you both because of what I've been asked to do in Ohio, some educational stuff. So
we have actually been in discussion with how are we going to share this with the wider world, because we do think it's useful in places other than just Nebraska, even using a Nebraska map.
What you're doing is exactly what I've been asked to do by the Ohio dairy producers, and it's called a program Manure First.
Okay. Perfect.
Educational series where we're trying to convince basically exactly what you're doing. Get manure to acres that haven't had manure, and do it not only for the farmer, but for the nutrient service provider to maybe help them realize the opportunities they're missing by not working with livestock producers. And also, I want to take it to the next step of public awareness. You know, what can we do to make public aware of the fact that they seem to get real excited about when manure is used in organic production and don't have a problem with that, but yet when it's used in conventional production, they seem to get excited. I'm not sure why.
We have used it a little bit with folks that it was not originally intended for. We did a little bit of a program that included some city administrator type folks and some county facilities or county board. And it was well received with them as well. We only did a portion of it. It wasn't actually the soil health part of it that we did do it with them, but they appreciated understanding better how those decisions are made. So that's good.
Hey, Leslie,
I will
would
be in contact with you guys.
All right, great.
I will be in contact with you as well, because I'm a extension associate, so I do lots and lots of training. I think this is a real nice program, very visual.
Yes, thank you.
And we invite people to kind of create their own scenarios, their own activities. There's nothing magic about the 6 that we've created, and encourage you to alter it to kind of fit your own location if our map doesn't work all that well for you. So please feel free to alter it. But we will provide you access to a folder that has these files that you could download. It will probably be the way we do it for right now. Well, thanks for the opportunity to share with you folks. We've been happy about how engaging this activity is with farmers. We have learned that you can't do this in large groups. You do need to break it down into small groups of people to really encourage that conversation. But putting 6 to 8 people around a table with a facilitator works pretty well, or can work very well, I would think. But as you plan on using this, you might think in terms, if you're going to have groups larger than 6 or 8, train several facilitators so you have one of those at each table.
Yes, definite lesson learned.
Yeah.